Hello everyone, and welcome to another one of our videos. Today I'm going to be showing you how to replace the vacuum element that controls the trunk closing handle on my W140 Mercedes S-Class. This will apply to all Mercedes S-Classes or the W140 generation. Every single one of the cars came with the handle that pops out of the trunk when you open it, and that should retract into the trunk whenever you close it. The issue I've been having is that the trunk handle will pop out randomly, and it's been getting progressively more frequent and worse over the past few months. So I'm going to go ahead and replace this as a first step in diagnosing the issue, because the only other thing it could really be is the vacuum pump, which is a lot more in-depth of a replacement and repair. So I'm going to go ahead and walk over to the car, show you what to start popping off in order to replace this element. So per the factory service manual, the first step in removing the trunk liner, which is the first step in removing the handle element, is pulling off these covers on the sides. Now I think I'm only going to have to pull them loose by removing this clip right here, and that's going to be mirrored on the other side as well. And once that's removed, I believe I should be able to have enough play to rotate this out a little bit in order to get the trunk liner out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we'll see where we're at once I've got that done. Alrighty, so I have the trunk hinge covers removed, or at least loosened up enough to be able to access the trunk panel up at top. All I had to do was pull out the clip like I said, and I also took loose these two, which retain the cover to the actual trunk hinge piece itself. So what I'm going to do is repeat the process on the other side, and I'm going to start removing the trunk liner. Alright, the next step in removing the trunk panel is removing the little retaining clip that holds up your spare tire cover / trunk floor. In order to do that, it's a little bit of a two-step process. You take a plastic pry tool or any sort of screwdriver and pull out this retaining clip here. And at that point, you can take a larger trim tool, slip it behind, and it'll just pop right out. So now we're going to move on to the next step. Alright, at this point I have the trunk panel removed and I have the vacuum element out of the vehicle, as you can see with the hole right there. All I had to do was pop the panel loose. There's a ton of clips around it that go into these holes. I believe there's 18 total, and all you have to do is reach behind the panel and kind of pop it off using your fingers. You don't really need any plastic pry tools or anything like that to get it off. And once you have it pried off, then you have full access to remove the vacuum actuator. To do that, there is one screw that holds it in over here. I believe on some models there's going to be two screws depending on what revision of the vehicle and actuator that you have is. And in addition to that, you need to remove the two inner screws for the license plate lights right there and right there. And at that point, all you need to do is make sure that you have the vacuum actuator closed. So in order to do that, all you need to do is flip the trunk latch right here into the locked position. You just push on the little locking tang right there, and that's all you need to do. And then from there, the vacuum actuator will just drop out from the central cavity right here. You just have to wiggle it loose and it'll just come right out. Now you're going to need to disconnect a pneumatic line. On these Mercedes, generally speaking, the mating part, in this case the actuator, will break whenever you disconnect the line, and that is indeed what happened here. Two of the little tabs broke off, but I was able to get the line disconnected, keeping the actual line and its fitting intact, which is what matters because we have a replacement for this actuator right here. So what I'm going to do is take that actuator over to the workbench and remove it from the rest of the assembly and reconnect everything, and I'll show you how to do all of that. Alright, as you can see, I have the actuator on the bench now, and I'm getting started taking it apart. It's pretty simple once you figure it out, but it takes a little bit of troubleshooting and finagling to get this thing loose. So basically what you're going to want to do is take a screwdriver, and on the sides here, this will be snapped further over these metal tabs right here. And what you're going to want to do is take your screwdriver, stick it in from the bottom, and pry downwards. And there's a little plastic tab within the actuator right here that you're going to pry, and it'll let the actuator pop up off those tabs, and you're going to repeat that on the other side as well. And from that point, you're going to have the actuator loose from the assembly. So then you'll be able to manipulate it such that you open the handle a little bit, and you can flip the actuator around, and you'll have access to the two Torx screws, I believe they're T10, that hold the actual actuator onto the rest of the mechanism. So what you're going to do then is remove those two screws, which I'm going to do, and install the new actuator reusing those two screws, and then clip the new actuator back into place. It's a pretty straightforward process once you get it down, but it takes a little bit of finagling to figure out how exactly the whole thing comes apart, because the rest of this linkage mechanism is not very easy to take apart, and some of the parts are permanently fastened together. So I'm going to go ahead, take those two screws out, throw my new actuator on, and I'll be back and show you how to reinstall it in the car. Okay, so I have the actuator back together now. It was pretty simple, just had to put the 2 screws in. They are self-tapping Torx screws, so you're gonna have to wind them in a little bit with a little bit more force than you might be used to, at least more force than they came out with. And then all I did was pivot this actuator around and clipped it into place. As you can see, I have everything functioning properly now. And one thing that I do want to mention is that I lubricated all of the pivot points all over the place with some dry Teflon lubricant. I like to use that anywhere that I don't want dust to be attracted to normal lithium grease or something like that and cause abrasion. So everything's lubricated. I didn't clean off any of the old lubricant. I just added Teflon lubricant to it. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead, install this back in the car, and we'll come back and test it out. All right, so as you can see, we have the new actuator reinstalled. It was pretty simple to put in. The biggest issue that we ran into was slipping this back in. You have to be careful not to get this metal bracket caught on the actual trunk inner shell itself. And you also have to make note of the fact that whenever you try to slip it back in, you're going to slip it in backside first, but it's also very easy to hit the studs that come through from the emblem. So again, be very careful whenever you're slipping it back in. You might have to reach a hand through over here or something to kind of pry it down as you push it up into place. So everything is screwed back in. The 1 8mm screw right here is back in place, as well as the 2 Phillips head ones that also hold the license plate lamps in. And if you take a look, whenever we release the trunk handle, it releases with a lot more force than it used to. So again, I'm not 100% sure that this was the underlying issue with why this handle was coming out. We'll just have to test out and see in the next few days whether or not this was the issue. But overall, it's a pretty simple job to do once you kind of figure out how everything goes together and comes apart. So with that, I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.